Hey, I'm Yaz Gagne, host of the Most Innovative Companies podcast. Today, we've got a special custom episode from Williams and FASTCO Works. Enjoy!
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen Koch, and on behalf of Fast Company and Williams, welcome to today's conversation. Artificial intelligence. We're constantly hearing about how virtually every industry is looking to harness its incredible potential, use it to improve efficiencies or develop cutting-edge solutions. But we don't hear much talk about the massive amounts of energy AI computing requires. That's the setup for today's conversation. And here to help us understand AI's skyrocketing power requirements and how to best meet them is Chad Zamarin. Chad is Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategic Development for Williams. Chad, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kathleen. Great to be with you.
Chad, most people, I think, have at least dipped their toes into AI waters, right? They've done a search or they've created a silly image, and companies are now increasingly seeing AI as a vital tool. But most individuals don't realize that using ChatGPT for a simple query requires 30 times more energy than doing a Google search or generating one image of the Pope in a puffy designer jacket. Can use almost as much energy as charging your smartphone. And that's just the small stuff. So how serious is the AI energy challenge, and how much is it boosting electricity consumption here in the U.S.?
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. It is a real challenge. And I will tell you that, as an energy company, Williams has been operating in the United States for over 100 years. So we've seen a lot over the course of our time. We move over a third of the nation's natural gas. So we're a large company that moves energy across the entire United States. And I will tell you that we're seeing demands on our energy ecosystem like we've never seen before. And, you mentioned the idea of, the Pope in a puffy jacket, but even companies like ours, we have a tremendous amount of information as a company, as a country, and we are just now unlocking these technologies to really take that data and that information and make much more advanced analysis and, frankly, decision-making. And your question about energy is a really important one. The technology is taking off and there's a lot that we can do with it, but we are absolutely seeing that the low-hanging fruit, the ability to just plug into the power generation of the U.S. Most people, you ask them where their power comes from, they'll tell you it comes from the outlet in the wall. But there is a tremendous amount of energy generation that has to happen, transmission that has to happen in order for us to deliver the energy needs. And with this rapid ramp up in demand, we've really started to see the limits of our infrastructure. It's kind of like the highways were already full, and now we're putting a whole new set of cars on those same highways. And so how we're going to make sure that we can take this opportunity to the next level is going to absolutely be an energy challenge that we've got to solve.
What are we talking about? Are we talking about a doubling? Are we talking about a tripling? Do we even know?
We don't know. And the range of outcomes is incredibly wide for a couple of reasons. One, it's still, unknown how big the opportunity can be from a technology development perspective. But I would tell you that from what we've seen, we think that is going to be an incredible opportunity, only limited almost by your imagination. What's going to constrain our ability to achieve these technology advancements is truly that it is moving up against the limit of our infrastructure to deliver power and allow us to build out the capabilities necessary. And so, when we think about the growth in power demand over the last decade, we're forecasting more than triple the speed of growth over the next decade. We're talking about data center power demand being, in some conservative models, doubling by the end of the decade. And so the limit of our abilities and opportunity, though, will truly be our ability to build the generating and transmission infrastructure to serve those growing needs. And so that's the bottleneck we've got to solve if we want to reach full potential.
Chad, so this is the first, I think, again, as I implied at the beginning, that I think many people are hearing about this because power demand had been pretty level. So why didn't we see this coming? Don't we have state and federal regulators who are charged with, this is their job, tracking, predicting energy demand, making sure our utilities are positioned to meet it?
I think we have seen it coming. We may not hear about it enough, but if you think about the last 10 years, I'll use our industry and infrastructure as an example. We've increased natural gas demand in the United States by over 50% in the last 10 years. We've only increased natural gas infrastructure by about 25%. And so when you don't increase the infrastructure at the pace of the demand growth, you're going to run into these challenges. And so we've seen this happening across our infrastructure, not just in the natural gas space. It's harder to build in the United States. Permitting has taken longer. So when we think about expanding at the same time renewable energy, and we want to grow electricity, we want to electrify vehicles, we want to add heat pumps, electric heat pumps to the home heating market. And at the same time now, we want to dramatically increase data centers and artificial intelligence. We're trying to push all of that infrastructure and capabilities through a limited amount of resource that we have. And so that's really the challenge that I think, unfortunately, you oftentimes don't deal with the problem until it becomes such a real, kind of in your face challenge. And that's kind of where we're getting to today. We're now seeing that the lack of infrastructure development is catching up with the demand growth that we want to continue in the United States. If we want to continue to be the world's leader from a technology and environmental perspective, we've got to have the infrastructure to keep pace with those needs.
Well, I guess part of the demand is also driven by onshoring, right? So we want the companies to come back to the US. We want to build products here, but you need power.
Absolutely. And the reason why onshoring has been a great trend for us, it's because America has such an advantage from an energy cost and reliability perspective. There is no other country in the world that has the infrastructure and the capabilities that we have to develop energy affordably and reliably. And so that's why we've seen over the last several years a significant amount of onshoring. That's why we hope that the artificial intelligence opportunity is ours as a country for the taking, but we're going to have to stay ahead of the infrastructure needed to unlock that potential.
But Chad, we do have important state and federal climate goals that we're committed to reaching, and the plan was that the United States would meet them in large part by transitioning to renewable energy sources. But am I hearing you say that wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, those clean energy sources can't provide the energy that we're going to need if this power demand explodes?
We're a believer in the need for those technologies to be complemented with a reliable technology like natural gas. If you think about the United States today, we've proven over the last 10 years that actually natural gas can be the most powerful decarbonization tool. It's actually been the leading cause of driving down emissions here in the US. You mentioned our climate goals. The only country that's met its Paris climate targets has been the United States. And we've done that primarily by displacing coal with natural gas. Now, we still burn a lot of coal here in the United States. We burn, unfortunately, in the world, we will burn more coal this year than ever in the history of the planet. We've got a huge opportunity to keep using natural gas. But as we think about introducing even more intermittent renewable resources like solar and wind, we've done that in the US as well. If you look at the largest wind markets in the United States, Texas, Oklahoma, those markets actually work because as the wind slows down, as the sun sets, natural gas is the primary tool that picks up the slack and allows us to balance the market. The lights don't flicker, they don't turn on and off with the variability of wind and sun. We've seen that the model of natural gas balancing those technologies is the fastest, most effective way to get to real reductions in emissions. And so that's been our focus as a company, both focused on natural gas as a backbone in partnership with solar and wind. If geothermal can work at scale, if hydrogen can work at scale, these are the technologies that we need to scale up. But it's important to have that reliability backbone so that we don't have, the challenges from a cost and reliability perspective that we're starting to see if we don't keep pace.
I'm curious, what about nuclear energy? The White House has been pushing that as part of the solution. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, in a speech this spring, said the U.S. needed to triple the output of nuclear energy by 2050. Does that play a role?
It should. If environmental concerns and frankly, cost and physics, kind of matter, then it should. But I will tell you that we're going the wrong direction from a nuclear energy perspective here in the US and frankly around the world. We've been taking nuclear energy for the most part out of the equation. And, there's still some, I think, legacy concerns with nuclear's performance in the past. I think those are valid, but we've made it so hard to permit and build new nuclear energy that we just haven't seen that as a viable part of the solution. We think it makes a lot of sense, but to imagine nuclear being a part of the near-term solution, we'd have to see dramatic changes from a policy perspective, from a permitting perspective, because the risk and the cost associated with the very long process of permitting and developing nuclear has made it really challenged here in the United States. So we're hopeful. The first thing we need to do, though, is not take nuclear out of the equation. We have zero emissions energy operating today, and we've seen nuclear actually shrink as a percentage of global energy production, and we've got to address that issue.
Back to what you were saying earlier about natural gas. I know Goldman Sachs seems to agree with you. In a recent report, it said it's predicting that natural gas may supply 60% of the power needed by AI. Is it speed? Is that it? The infrastructure is more or less there. But help us understand the other unique advantages that you believe that it holds over other forms of energy.
Yeah, speed is one of them. I will say, we should be proud as a country. I mean, we are the world's leading producer of natural gas. We're now, just in the last, 5 years, we've become the largest exporter of natural gas in the world. And that has created an incredible economic security blanket for the U.S., also an international truly security blanket. I mean, imagine if we couldn't have more than doubled natural gas imports into Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine. Like, that ability that we have as a dominant producer of natural gas on the global stage is incredible achievement, but also really important for our country. It also means we've got, one of the most affordable resources in the world from an energy production perspective. At the retail level, natural gas is about 4 times cheaper than electricity. So it's a very affordable, abundant resource that we have. And I think most importantly, which is really important in this AI conversation, these data centers have to run with incredible reliability. They call it like the 5 nines, 99.99999%, reliability is required. You can't be in this heavy kind of processing mode of operations and afford a reliability disruption. And so truly, many of these data centers have minutes to a day or two a year where they can be down from an operating perspective. And so natural gas is an incredibly dispatchable tool. That is one of the challenges we're trying to solve with powering solutions like artificial intelligence and these models with solar and wind. The intermittency of solar and wind, you have to couple it with a technology that can make sure when the sun sets, I say this all the time, that's often when our power demands are increasing the most. We come home, we are cooling our homes. My wife is turning on, bad reality TV. Like, that's when we need energy the most.
Doing the laundry, right?
Right. But it's when the sun is setting. And interestingly, oftentimes it's when the wind slows down and we don't have as much wind power generation. So we've got to be able to balance that. What we really believe is the abundance that we have from a natural gas perspective, and then the ability for it to provide reliable energy. We're already the world's dominant producer of this important energy resource. Let's make it an important part of that decarbonization, low, ultimately zero emission solution that we're looking for.
How do we further decarbonize natural gas?
If I had asked our engineers to build natural gas infrastructure today, they would build it with no emissions. If you think about, we've been building energy infrastructure in the US for 200 years, and we actually designed these systems to create emissions intentionally. We didn't know at the time, that they were bad for the environment. We actually designed our systems and equipment to intentionally emit. When we operate a valve, when we blow down a facility, we just evacuate the gas to the atmosphere to do maintenance on a facility. Those are actually our greatest sources of emissions through our value chain. Those are things we understand, we control, we can design and remove from the value chain, from the equation. So when we talk about decarbonizing existing energy supply chains.
So are you doing that?
Yes, we are. In fact, this year, Williams alone will spend over $300 million in emissions reductions investments across our system in order to take the emissions out of the value chain, because we want to focus on the benefit of when we use natural gas to displace high emissions fuels like coal. When we couple them with renewables, we couple them with technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, we design the energy economy of the future.
Let's talk about those data centers you were mentioning earlier. I understand that Williams has been approached by some of the largest independent data center developers asking if they can receive natural gas capacity directly from your company's pipelines. I mean, how extraordinary is that? And what are they telling you?
It is. And here's what's happened. And I mentioned it at the very onset. The traditional model has been a data center developer just plugs into the grid. And because we've had excess capacity in the US, We've been blessed with the infrastructure that we have. The growth that we've seen in data centers, which has primarily been web services over the last, you think about streaming your Netflix or, watching a YouTube video. That's been the primary source of data centers traditionally. What we're now moving into is this high fidelity, high capacity learning model, analytical processing that's required. That's the stuff that really requires the power in order to do these very complex learning models. We're seeing a shift in the type of data center that's being developed. At the same time, we're seeing the grid capacity has been all used up. The low-hanging fruit has been plucked. And so now we see that if we want to build a data center, plug it into the grid, it's going to take many years to build the capacity that the grid could provide to a data center. At the same time, we're adding electric vehicles, I mentioned heat pumps. So the demands on the energy system and on the power grid are significant. We look at this opportunity. If the US wants to be a leader in artificial intelligence, then we've got to stay ahead of the competition, which frankly is a global competition for this technology. And so we are seeing that natural gas directly to power data centers could be a way to gain speed to market while we build the grid out. That can become the primary power over time. But in the meantime, we can use natural gas to serve that need.
Where exactly are your pipelines located? And do you have the extra capacity right now to meet that coming surge in demand?
The great thing about the United States is we do have an incredible energy infrastructure. We operate pipelines that span the entire United States. We operate from the Gulf Coast through the Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, all the way up into the Northeast. We operate in the Pacific Northwest, in the Rockies. We take it for granted. I mean, there are still over 3 billion people around the world that live in some form of energy poverty. Over 3 billion people that still heat their homes, cook their foods with manure, wood, or coal. What we take for granted is something that we really do need to continue to develop and build upon, and frankly, export to the rest of the world so that we make sure they're going to use clean energy in order to meet their appetite for growing out of poverty and into kind of the quality of life that we enjoy. So the challenge, though, that we have is we operate these systems across the entire U.S. As I mentioned, we have not been keeping pace with the demand that's grown truly across the entire United States. I mean, we produce gas in Wyoming that gets consumed in California and Oregon and Washington, but those pipelines are full. We produce gas in the Gulf Coast and in the Haynesville and Louisiana that gets moved to the Northeast and delivered into Northeast markets, but those pipelines are fully contracted. It's kind of like I mentioned earlier, the highways are pretty full. There are traffic jams kind of all over the United States. And so we've got to add additional capacity to meet these needs. And that's been a real challenge here in the US. It's something we've got to get back to building if we really do want to keep pace with the goals that we have.
What's standing in the way right now, Chad?
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple. We're standing in our own way. We've created so much permitting bureaucracy that we have good projects with great merit that can't get built. I'll give you an example. We were going to build a project into New York City primarily to serve low-income housing that's dependent today on home heating oil. We drive trucks from New Jersey into New York City to fill up these boilers that burn home heating oil, which is a very, very high emissions operation. We were going to build a natural gas pipeline that would have dramatically lowered those emissions, and we couldn't get the project built. Interestingly, it's not just a natural gas pipeline challenge. Building solar. We have a solar project in Ohio. There's a lot of opposition to using land for any new development. Unfortunately, we've created a system where we've kind of gone too far. The pendulum has swung so far that very small interested parties can stop something that would benefit the entire country. And so we've got to get back to making sure that when we identify projects that are good for the nation, that are good for our communities, that we can get going on building that infrastructure. And so permitting reform is really important. We've been supporting several efforts that have been ongoing in the Congress. Those need to happen. Frankly, that needs to happen so we can build out the transmission infrastructure that we need for renewables. Alongside that, as I mentioned, to make sure we've got a reliable energy system, we've got to build the natural gas capacity so that we can have an energy system that can accommodate all our needs.
So that doesn't change if this permitting reform does not pass. What's at stake?
We're already seeing across the United States during winter storm events, during very hot periods, we're seeing disruptions to energy systems. We're seeing significant spikes in energy prices. That's one thing. We see reliability and energy costs becoming increasingly volatile in the United States. We need to solve that. We need to look at examples around the world where, at least in the near term, we've seen, energy prices here domestically attract investment, attract development. But we need to make sure we stay ahead of that, because when you try to squeeze more into the same size system, you end up decreasing reliability and increasing price volatility. And that's what we've seen signs of here in the United States. And so we've definitely got to stay ahead of that. I think the theme of this discussion, this is a global race for who will be the technology provider of the future. These emerging technologies will be built. The question will be, will they be built and headquartered here in the United States? Or will countries that don't have the same care maybe about how things are developed be the winners in this kind of race for development? And we've heard countries like Saudi Arabia have said they want to be the data center provider for the world. I think it'd be better for the United States to be the technology leader for the world. And so we've got to make sure that we design permitting processes and infrastructure development processes that keep pace with our capabilities.
So, Chad, as we wrap, what would you say is the takeaway for the business leaders who are listening to us today? How should this impact their thinking, their plans, their actions going forward?
I wish I had all the answers, but I will tell you one theme that I think is super important that I've learned being the kind of company that we are here at Williams is that these are complex systems. These are big, ambitious goals that we have, and no one alone will achieve them. It requires collaboration between the public, the government, the private industry. This is not renewables versus natural gas. This is not data centers versus electricity versus natural gas infrastructure. We are going to need to put the puzzle pieces together across a complex network of infrastructure and technology development alongside how we do that, from a regulatory and permitting perspective. And so my takeaway continues to be, this is what we do in America. We figure out how to do tough things. If we can see this as that next opportunity, and we instead of hunkering down into our own kind of unique spaces, we figure out how to create connections across what might have been unnatural or not obvious industries and opportunities. I think that's going to be the key to us unlocking our full potential and really being no one but us. This is the kind of challenge and opportunity that, frankly, defines what's so great about America. This is what we should be the world's leader in. But if you look at where we stand today and putting all those pieces together, that's what's going to be the real magic that's going to need to happen.
Chad Zamarin, Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategic Development for Williams. Thank you so much for the fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Kathleen. Great to be here.
And on behalf of Williams and Fast Company, thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you learned as much as I did.